everybody, and welcome to the May meeting. Just before we start on tonight's agenda, just a reminder of our next meeting, which is on the 8th of June. This will look into how to improve programme performance by memory analysis and performance profiling. And this will be presented by Jiri there at the front, who many of you will know is our branch secretary. That will be our last meeting of the 2016-17 cycle. We're currently working hard to put a programme together for next year, and that will be published in due course on the branch website. However, if you want to put a date in your diary, the first meeting for next year will be on the 14th of September, and the talk is on the impact of Brexit on IT, which should be both interesting and topical, I would hope. So on to tonight's talk. I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. David Michel from Tesella, who is actually a former colleague of mine, so I've sort of press-ganged him into coming to that. The Agile approach to project management and software development has become very popular, and it has the potential for making sure we do the right thing. So tonight David's going to discuss delivering business value with Agile. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm French, but I'm not going to talk about Brexit. So it's going to be fun. Right. So recently I was wondering myself, like, how many features Microsoft Word has, and then I find out that's actually quite a lot. There's actually quite a lot of features. And if you print out all the toolbars and all the icons on the old version, now you can't with the ribbon, but if you look at all the icons, you have something like this. It gives very little space left to actually write something, which is kind of interesting. But I mean, the point here, I guess, is there's a lot of features, and the point, how many do you actually use out of all that lot of features? It's completely bloated with stuff that we never use. And there are some very, alarming research and surveys done where numbers like this, 64% of features are rarely or never used. This is crazy. It makes me think: are we just wasting our time building stuff that doesn't really matter? So this is what I want to talk about: delivering what we call business value, impact, benefits, that kind of thing. With Agile as the methodology. So, as Brian said, I'm David. I work for Tesella. We are a service-based company based in Abingdon, so not too far from here. And I've worked with the Scrum Alliance. I'm a certified Scrum Master and product owner. And I've been working with Agile methodologies for many years now, almost 10 years. So I'll try to share with you some of the findings I've discovered while working with that methodology in terms of delivering value to customers. So I'm not quite sure what you guys know about Agile and Scrum. So I'm going to be asking the question, do you know what this diagram means? And if you do, that'd be good. If not, I'll explain a bit. Yeah? No? Not really? Okay. So Agile basically is a software development methodology where we don't really look at a plan and then work that plan and hope for the best. The idea is to have more of an iterative system. So you have a product backlog where you define all the things you have to do for that software, all the features, if you wish. And then you're going to iteratively work through that backlog. So you get a sprint backlog, which is a selection of the high priority items that you want to do first. Then you work through a sprint, which might be 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe. And then you deliver that product just with those features, those high priority features. And then you deliver that to the customer and you get them to use it. And by using it, they'll give you some feedback. Is it working? Is it not working? Is there bugs? Was it the right product to build in the first place? You get feedback, you adjust your product backlog, you adjust your sprint backlog, and you do that again and again and again. That's the idea of Agile. Very different from the old waterfall, right? The old traditional software development method, where everything is defined up front. Here you just adapt as you go along. You discover what's wrong and you fix it. So it's inspect and adapt, inspect and adapt. That's basically the mindset and the philosophy behind this. And it's very much mainstream nowadays. I think at Tesla this is like 90% of projects are run this way. Now, some people think about hyper-productive team. That's some terms I've seen online, and when they're using Agile or Scrum, which that was the methodology there, you get curve like this, where I show a month at the bottom. From the point where you adopt Agile and Scrum, you become like 800% productive, which sounds crazy to me. Everybody would love to be 800% productive, I'm sure. And I've never, it sounds really unrealistic to me, really. But why not? I'm not going to doubt the data. Let's take it as true. The problem with that team, it looks like it was very well oiled and it worked really well. But the problem is the product they were developing there was MySpace.com, which is probably the most irrelevant social media website nowadays, right, compared to Facebook and Twitter, etc. So the point I'm making here is that the team was very productive. They produced a lot of software and very good tested quality built in, but it was the wrong product. It was a product that nobody cares about anymore. And there is this great quote from Peter Drucker, this famous economist. So there's surely nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency what should not be done at all. Right? Back to what I was saying earlier, are we just basically wasting our time building all these features that nobody wants? The key for me here is how do we measure success, or what is success in fact? And in Agile, how do we measure progress? Right? So you have a list of stuff to do. You have a list of some features here, and you can sort of measure how fast you go by how much you deliver at every sprint. That's your team velocity, as we call it. How many stories, how many features you deliver per sprint. And from that, you can sort of infer when you'll be done. Right? That's how most people do it. In fact, that's how we did it before Agile, with Waterfall. Yeah, some amount to do. You have some Gantt chart maybe, and it tells you where we're going to finish by July or something. The problem there is that we focus on just building stuff. Nothing there in that process is checking whether this is the right product. So basically, we're just delivering features, a bunch of features. And when you look at the project management style and processes that we use for delivering stuff, we're really good at it. We're really efficient. So you have books like this. Nothing like against that book. They're all the same. But they look at this: budget, on target, on time. That's the three project management legs, right? The three pillars of project management. The problem is this got nothing to do with value. Is the software useful, valuable? Does it bring benefits to the users? None of that checks this. It just checks whether you've delivered the box on time. Is the box, what's in the box, is it useful? And we're just basically assuming that the requirements were correct. We're just assuming that this was the right thing to build, and we're not checking this. The problem is, another statistics for you, 50% of project failures are due to missing or misunderstood requirements. So if we assume that the requirements are right, we have a problem. So I like to think about this in terms of output versus outcome. Input is your mug of coffee, you pour it, that's the action you have to do. The output is the actual drinking of the coffee. But that's not what you're after. What you're after is the outcome, the benefit, the fact that it's nice, the fact that you enjoy it, the fact that you get maybe some refreshment out of it, or a bit of a boost if it's a strong coffee. So think of the input as your requirements, and the output as the actual software, the actual features. But the outcome is the benefit of the features, of using it, the impact that you get. If it's a business for where you do software for money, does it improve your sales? Is it a good product that people like, etc.? So output, not the same as outcome. Right? And when we focus about on time, on budget, on scope, we are looking at just output and nothing else. And that's a problem. We're just ignoring the outcome. And if we do that, we're basically declaring victory too soon, right? We've delivered stuff and we think, okay, that's fine, job done. That's not quite true, right? We've seen that with myspace.com. Another way to look at this is, are we building the right thing versus building the thing right? Yeah. So when we focus on output, we are focusing on building the thing right. So it's tested, it's got quality, it's got no bugs, etc. That kind of concern. Is it going to be delivered on time? This sort of thing. As I said, nothing checking whether this is the right thing to build in the first place. So again, it goes back to how do we actually define success? So Agile, as a manifesto that people who came up with the methodology signed. So it's good to look back at what do they actually say in that manifesto. And they say, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer. Satisfy the customer, right? Outcome. Through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So the key word there is valuable, right? Not just software, valuable software. So then that's where business value comes in. Right? What is business value? A lot of people talk about business value in the industry. That's the word that comes up all the time in any meeting about contracts and all the things. But what is it? Nobody actually defines it really, because it's a bit of a fluffy term. It's quite hard to define. So it's not the cost that of it to build it. It's very different. Now, Warren Buffett says, price is what you pay, right? But value is what you get. Is very different. Right? So if you buy a football to a kid to play, and they're going to play hours and months with it, the value of that football is really high, but the cost was pretty low. Now, how many times have you bought a very expensive toy to a kid and they play 10 minutes with it and then chuck it? So the price was high, but the value was pretty low on that toy. So how do we define value then? Well, very simply, we can think of it as benefits, as in the perceived gain while using that thing, over the cost, which is perceived loss. Right? So if you're using a software, maybe you're replacing an old one. Maybe it hasn't got all the features that the old one has, so you've lost something. Maybe you've gained more things. Yes?
Sorry, I've got to ask a question.
Yes.
Coming from an accounting perspective, why don't you say benefits minus cost?
Minus cost, yes. Well, it's just you could think of it as a value between, whether it's above 0, above 1 or below 1.
Well, that's wrong.
Just a ratio.
Surely that's wrong. It's benefits minus cost.
Yeah, well, it depends if you think of it as a ratio. But you'll see that later. And I come to it again. So the problem with those valuable, how do you measure value, right? I mean, most of the things that we're interested about is KPIs and staff costs, profit, etc. These are hardcore numbers. But these are just tangible things. They're usually quite easy to measure if you have them. But most of what we consider valuable are intangible things. So things like comfort, excitement, attention, reputation, that sort of things. These are really, really hard to measure, and by definition, that you can't really put a number into those things, which makes being value-driven a bit complicated, because if you can't measure it, it becomes quite difficult then. And as this old saying, if you can't measure it, you cannot manage it, as they say. It's difficult, but this is understandable, right? I mean, if you have fuzzy numbers, you're going to have fuzzy actions, and managers don't like that, understandably. And it's susceptible to manipulation. Like you could interpret things well, you could negotiate a bit more, and that's, contractually speaking, a little bit risky. So people are a bit reluctant to go that route in that route. But then again, a clever chap there said, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So we measure, basically what that means is that we're measuring things that are easy to measure, and then they become our targets. Where what's hard to measure, we just ignore it because it's hard to measure. That's the problem. So what can we do? Well, I'm thinking about health health, we cannot really measure it. There's not like a single number where you say, well, I'm a 9, it doesn't really work that way. You can have metrics like heart rate or body fat, etc. But these are just metrics towards your health. You could have 0 body fat and still be unhealthy. So you can't really measure it. You can't single it out in one number. Yet we are very comfortable with the idea of health, and we have practices like medicine, which are very, very strict and very scientific. So my point there would be, how can we be value driven, just like medicine is health driven, even though we can't really measure it? Can't we do the same thing with software development? So where do we go from here? So the key question, like I just said, is how do we become value driven? Not so much how do we measure it, but how do we become value driven, as in not so much focusing on output, but focusing on outcome. So what questions are we interested in? Are we on track? How are we doing in terms of budgets, and when will we finish on time? These are not the questions that we should be asking ourselves. I mean, these are important, don't get me wrong, but the primary focus should be more like, are we delivering value to the customer? Does it impact their business? Is it, are they actually using it? And you'd be amazed by how many software get delivered and they are not used. Are we building the right thing? Now, in traditional project management for software, you have this page 1 of any project management manual, you find this triangle, where it defines the 3 elements of any project, right? So scope, what you have to do, resources, and time. And the idea is that you can't fix all 3. If you change one, the other 2 change as well. And traditionally, people, they come and ask you for something, so the scope is fixed. They want this and nothing else. Not less, not more, just exactly that. And they tend, therefore, to have really large and very long requirements documents, because they need to detail every single thing to make sure they get exactly what they want. And then the supplier has to estimate resources and time to be able to deliver that thing, right? In Agile, what we do is we turn that around. We say, well, we've got a team and we've got time, because they probably have a deadline, and the budget will give you that time, because we're paid by how much time it takes to build. So these are actually fixed. Now we take the scope as the variable. If we're going to have to look at what the highest priority stuff and deliver that. And if we don't get to the end, it doesn't matter, because you've delivered the higher priority first. But it's easy to say but hard to do. But in Agile, you have a backlog. If you remember the diagram from the beginning, the product backlog, where you can try to prioritize that. That's how we vary the scope. So you're going to have the really important stuff at the top, the high priority items, and then you can change that scope. You can insert items, you can delete some, you can refine, reprioritize. So you need to have this constant communication with the customer to be able to say, well, this took a bit longer, we're not going to be able to do that bit. Or do you want to add something new? Yes, you can, but that means you have to remove something. You have this negotiation, contractual thing going on there. There's another way to change scope, which is never talked about. And this is where I introduce this concept of fidelity. It's a very powerful concept. So let's say you need to build a road to go from A to B. That's your goal. There's many ways to build a road. It could be just a dirt road. It could be stone or pebble road. Or it could be a nice motorway, right, with all the shebang around. You can see how the one on the left is cheaper to build than the one on the right, but it's still a road. It's still getting you from A to B. It's still doing the job. It's still solving the problem. Right? So if you have this task that's going from A to B, and you say, well, we don't have the time to build the motorway, you might be tempted to say, well, we can't do that feature, but maybe we can. You just have to make it smaller. Right? So the idea is that you have the fidelity has increased there. So the The dirt road on the left is a low fidelity solution to your problem. On the right, this is a high fidelity solution. So you can thin your scope, right? So it's cheaper to build, takes less time, etc. But you still have the whole scope. So if you're building a car, right, you need wheels, an engine, a chassis, gearbox, etc. If you're asking the customer, say, well, we don't have the time to do the engine. Sorry. It's a bit of a problem, right? You can't really do that. The customer quite rightly will say, well, I need it all, right? I can't just remove stuff. You can't just change the scope like that. Because if you haven't got the engine, you haven't got a car. That's a problem, right? But you can make a small engine. You don't have to have a sports car, right? It could be a simple engine. If you're talking about the wheels, you don't have to have ABS, maybe. Maybe you just do simple brakes, etc. There's always ways to reduce the scope that way, and yet having the full system in place. And that's a very powerful idea of fidelity here. And if you do that, you might be able to redo things. And that's when you're iterating, right? When you do something with a low fidelity solution, like you have to do this painting, so you start with a very high level low fidelity solution, and then the hand is up there at the mouth. So if you change your mind, when you get that feedback from the customer, right, we wanted the hand here, but actually we think that's not right, we need to change it. You can, because it's cheap. It's cheap at this stage to change it. If you wait at the end, it's really expensive. You have to redo the whole thing. It can take a lot longer, it costs a lot more. So this idea of iterating it and using that fidelity concept is really, really powerful there. Problem is that's not what people do. Most people, when they build software, they do it like that. They're not iterating, they are incrementing. They're just building it bit by bit. And they've already agreed what the final solution should be, right at the start. Right, in the first picture, it's already been decided how the rest of the picture will look like. And it will be very expensive to change anything. So iterating is the way to go, but most people don't do that. And people say they are iterating, but they are not, because if you ask them, did you do that more than once? They go, no, of course, I've done that task and do the next one. So if you don't do it more than once, you're not iterating. So if you look at Agile textbooks, and they all say you have a product backlog and prioritize it. The problem is they always show diagrams like that where you just have a linear, like a to-do list, basically, right? It's just a to-do list with high priority at the top, low priority at the bottom, fine. The problem there is that it's just a linear list of things to do, so you're thinking incrementally. You're thinking, well, I've done the task, now I'll do the next one. It doesn't invite you, it doesn't encourage you to think iteratively. And then the goal there becomes, well, you want to deliver as much as possible. That's why the customer's happy, he's got more features. But that's output-driven, not outcome-driven, because you could deliver more stuff, but is it useful stuff? No. I'm not sure. There's nothing there that checks it. So we really have to think about the goal and link that to the requirements of the task at hand. So I found really useful to build maps like that, where you have a goal on the left. Right? What is it that we want to achieve for the business? What's the impact, the benefit that we get out of this? And on the far right, you've got all the options that you may do to achieve that goal. That's the same as a to-do list, really. It's just a list of things to do. But they're not things to do, they're things to try. Right? So you can think about which one is most likely to succeed, and you do that, and you check whether the goal has been achieved. If it hasn't, you do the next one. So the goal is reversed there. You don't do as much as possible, you do as little as possible. Because once you've achieved the goal, you're done. You don't need to carry on. It's a very different way of looking at things. So just for reference, the guy who came up there is a guy called Axix, a consultant based in London, and he has a book. So this is called impact mapping. So you're mapping the impact, the goal, right, with your task, and in between the how and the who. Right? So you have all the elements that you need to work out. But what does the goal look like if we're talking about businesses and clients? So most people think about the two sides of the equation. Either you increase revenue or you reduce costs. they're actually another dimension to this. If you think, so this guy Andy Paul and Chris Massler, again based in London, software consultant, they came up with that model. And they say, well, there's this other side which is protect revenue. So it's not about increasing revenue, but protecting it from disappearing. So if you have a user base, you don't want them to go away and use another product than yours. So what can we do to protect that revenue? And if you have this in mind, it's a very different mindset from increasing revenue. So you'll be building very different features for that. And similarly, the other side of reducing cost is avoiding cost. So think about maybe regulatory things. You want to avoid a fine if you have to comply with some regulation or something like that. So this is kind of a business value model when you're talking about in financial terms. Right? So once you have that goal, you can think about some more strategy around how you're going to build this thing, how are we going to build this software. So if you think about risk, there's always risk with a project, right? If there were no risk, it wouldn't be a project, because why do it? You know, it probably means it's been done before. There's no risk. It means you have done it with the same people in the same condition with the same customer, and there's no point doing it again. So there's always going to be risk. And most of the risk is because we don't know things. There's just an amount of uncertainty that's risky to the project. So the idea there is we need to first pay to learn. Right? So we need to invest some time, some money to de-risk things. So if you increase your knowledge, you're going to reduce the risk. Right? And once you've acquired that knowledge, it de-risks the project, then you can build it and deliver value. And then polish it if you have time. Because again, very powerful concept here, but most people don't work that way. They try to deliver business from day one with all the risk. It's probably not a good idea. But if you want to do that, you have to have constant communication. You can't just have this kick-off meeting at the beginning and see you in 6 months. It doesn't really work. So you have the client, the product owner, the person who wants that product to be delivered, and the development team, the testers, etc. They need to communicate. They need to talk about. We talk about epic. It's like a big story, a big feature, and then you have smaller features, and then user stories, as that called in the Agile world. They are just features and tasks that the software should do. And people talk about those things when they do Agile, but they talk about technical details and things like that. But they're often missing those key questions. Right? How do we assess the impact on the business once we've delivered this? Right? At the end of the iteration cycle, we've delivered that thing. Did it impact the business? Did it change anything? And how do we judge whether this was the right thing to build in the first place? And maybe it was just another feature that people don't care about. So we need to be asking those questions. So if you remember those questions that we need to be asking ourselves, this actually should be part of our what we call acceptance criteria for when we deliver a feature. When the development team says, "Here, I think I'm done," right? Well, are you really done? Did you check what impact it has on customer? Did you ask them? Are they using it? That kind of questions. How do you know this was the right thing to build? Have we learned that through the process? In Agile, there's a concept of people talk about being done, right? So because people say I'm done, but what they mean when they say they're done, they've just completed the code. Maybe they've done some tests if you're lucky. But done is when it's released into production. It's actually being used by the users or the customers. There's another sorry.
Even the done is not necessarily done because it's not end of the life cycle. There is maintenance, there is bugs maybe.
That's true. Yes. But it's done from the team per se before it comes back to them. Oh, there is a bug. But that's what I'm getting at. There's another level.
So you need done. Need done.
That's what this guy was talking about in his book, the Lean Starter, which is a very famous book. Very different way of looking at things. When you're thinking about startups, where they have an idea, they have no idea whether the product that they want to build is going to please people, or whether people are going to download the app, if it's an app for a phone or something like that. And what he says is, well, we didn't consider work to be done or complete until they led to validated learning, as in, did we learn enough about this? Was this useful to build in the first place? Was this what people expected? Did it impact on their life? Did it help them, etc.? So in Agile, the way we define requirements is very, very small. So we wouldn't write a whole bunch of requirements document, because if you do that, it's really hard to change it. So we just have very high-level sentences like this one. They're usually called user stories, because this is about the user. So as a user, I want to be able to, let's say, view the shop catalog so I can monitor the inventory. And from that, you can start conversation with a product owner to develop that thing, and then you build it. This is a very typical user story. This is how they are mostly written down most of the time. And I want to focus on that bit, so I can monitor the inventory. That's the goal of the task, right? The problem there is that, if you're delivering this to a customer, could they not monitor the inventory before? And surely they could. If you're a shop, maybe it was manual, maybe it wasn't through software, right? Maybe it was just going through a list of paper or things like that. But surely they could do it before. So my point here is very unlikely that this wasn't the case. So where's the impact? Where is the change? Right? After you've built that thing, you've delivered it, what has changed for the user? So we need to capture that within the requirements so that we can then test it. Did it actually work? Was it successful? Right? If we're not capturing it, we can't then measure it, we can't test it. So some ideas are there to reformat the user story format. So instead of saying, as a user, I want to do this feature so that I get the benefit and the value and the value are right at the bottom. It's not being focused on it. The value should be right at the front. It should be right at the top of the sentence. It should be the first thing we talk about. So I would say let's reverse the sentence, right, and say we will get that benefit, we will get that value for these persons because we have this feature. The feature is just there to support the benefit, right? The output is only there to give you an outcome. So here's just an example. So if you say, as a user, I want to be able to make changes to my calendar and search without having to type on my iPhone because it saves me time and hassle. Right? The fact that it saves me time and hassle, that's the value, right? It should. Why is it at the bottom of the sentence? It should be what we communicate with. So let's just rephrase it. So basically, the idea is how we communicate with it. So let's sell with the benefit or the outcome and support with the features. But when people report progress, every time they say, well, we've done this feature, we've done that feature, and then next week we'll do this feature. They're talking about outputs and features. That's not talking to people. They don't care about features. Nobody wants to use your software. Right? They want the outcome of it. They want the benefit from it. Does that make sense? Yes. Now, as part of a communication plan with the customer, we need to think about how do we establish a value-driven relationship, because most of the time customers don't really think like this either, actually. They're also thinking in outputs. So we need to establish that communication with them. So the first thing is to define some value dials. Right? What are the value dials for your organization? Because it's going to depend on context, right? Depending on what the organization does. And they may or may not map to the financial bottom line. Right? Depends. Remember the tangible thing. So these need to be defined up front before we start any project at all. What are we trying to, what are the knobs you can turn to make your business better? Then we need some kind of currency, some kind of measurement unit, right? Story points is what is used in Agile for estimating the effort required to build something. We could think about estimating this value as well. We think this is going to give us that much benefit. and then some kind of strategy around those metrics. Because depending on the life cycle of that project, the relative importance of those dials and those metrics might differ. Right? So at the startup of the project, you might be looking at different metrics. Like, are people interested in this product? Is there an uptake? Do people like the idea? Once you're scaling it to bigger numbers of users, that might be a different focus then. And then when you talk about maintenance, then you might have a different focus yet again. So it's important to think about some kind of strategy around which metrics you use in what phase, and not use always the same metrics. And so again, we're talking about the ratio, the balance between how much is it going to cost to build it and how much value am I going to get out of it. We are very much cost-driven in this world. We're obsessed with numbers, really, if you think about it. So the cost should be a calculation, a bottom-up calculation from the team. The team will tell you this is going to cost that much because we think it's going to take that long to build. We're going to need that library, that platform, this computer, etc. This is a calculation of cost, calculation from the bottom. The value, on the other hand, should be an estimate from the top down. From the business people in that organization. We know, we think we're going to get that much benefit, and we put a price tag on it. This is very much an estimate because you don't know whether you're going to get it or not. So then you can test about that. So then how do you make decisions, right? That's what the business wants, be able to make decisions based on this trade-off between the cost of building something and the value you get out of it. But there's a problem with that. It's the problem of shared cost, because if you think of a software, you might build some infrastructure, like some database, some database layer to store information, and you have several features that use that database. So the cost of building the database, where do you count it? Because you have several benefits out of having that database. So it's the same there with the cow. You have the cost of raising the cow, but the cow gives you leather and beef. Right? So if you're going to compare the value of beef with the cost of raising the cow, you've already accounted for the cost of raising the cow. So when you look at the ROI for the value of leather, how do I account for the cost of raising the cow? You've already counted it. The point here is that doesn't work at really low level tasks. You've got to do that at a really high level. Yeah. But ultimately, the key measure of value is usage. Right? If nobody's using your software, it's a key indicator that it hasn't got any value. There's that book from Stephen Pressfield there says nobody wants to read your, and this is about how to write novels and books. And this guy had this revelation where he thought to himself, well, nobody wants to read my books. Nobody wake up one morning and say, hey, yeah, I've got 300 pages to read. Right? That's not what you read a book for. Right? You want the emotion of the story, maybe. You want to get out something. That's, again, the outcome, not the output. The output is the number of pages and the words, etc. It's a bit like if we were managing projects as if we were thinking, managing books and saying, well, the more pages you do, the better. And that's not how it works, right? We know that intuitively. And he has this sentence in it. He says, using a product is above all a transaction, because the user donates his time and attention. And time, right, is a supremely valuable commodity nowadays. So, in turn, we must do something worthy, something valuable, something good. Now, usage of as a measure of value is really easy these days. So we can, let's say we could measure, do the users use the feature per feature on the software. Let's say we could see how often they use it and for how long they use it for. You could have all sorts of analytics on this. It could be really interesting. And nowadays, as I said, it's really easy with web technologies to do that. Like Google Analytics and stuff like that. You can really easily go quite deep into how people are using the software. Is it more at night, during the day, etc., in the morning? You could really have a lot of insight on how people use your software. But of course, it only works if the users are not mandated to use it, which in bigger organizations that can be a problem, where some manager said, well, we're going to get that software and for people to use, and they haven't got a choice. Then of course that usage just doesn't work anymore. So, just to summarize, we talked about quite a lot of things. My key point here is output is not the same as outcome. We need, as a software development industry, we need to make that difference. Once we've made that difference, we can think about how do I measure value? What's value and how do I measure it? And we've seen that it's really difficult because it's mostly intangible things. So it's really hard to measure. So from that, we think, okay, we have to be value driven. Right? To do this, well, we need to be asking ourselves, are we building the right thing? That needs to be one of the main criteria while we're developing the system. To do that, we can think in terms of iterative development. We can turn around that triangle and then use scope as a variable. Right? That's what this means. If scope is a variable, we need to be able to change the backlog, the list of to-do. Right? So you can insert things, delete things, negotiate with the customer. You can also use that Fidelity concept. And if you use that Fidelity concept, then you can sort of start linking goals with tasks and reverse the way you work so that you don't try to do as much as possible, but you try to do as little as possible to get the goal. And we need to communicate with customers with value, not features. How we report to them, how we sell them, sell with the benefit, not the features. We can do that ROI calculation, but bear in mind that because of that problem of shared cost, that has to be at a relatively high level, otherwise it's really difficult to entangle. And then usage as the metric is probably the most, if it makes sense, if people are not mandated to use your software, then that's probably the best metric ever to really know what's going on and whether people like what you're doing. And that's me. So I'm happy to take questions, of course. Yes?
I would like to ask you,
Yes?
I saw a similar thing in big corporation and in a small startup. The problem is that Scrum Master and team can follow the Agile methodology, but the business owners don't do the backlog. Basically, they just maybe prioritize what when, but they own everything.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very common problem of Agile adoption. Like the managers, they think it's some kind of technique for the team. It's a technical thing, but the truth is, it has to be adopted by the whole organization, from top to bottom, for it to work. Is this what you mean?
Yeah, it's what I mean. The business rarely adopted properly, and you said that, Agile is buzzword, and lots of organizations try to implement it.
Yes.
But by my experience, teams implement it easily, but the business rarely.
Yes. That's why there's a boom in the consultancy world to drive the business forward with this, because it's just not working. So many people say, oh, we are Agile, but what they really mean is they have a meeting every 2 weeks. It's depressing. They have that cycle, this diagram I showed right at the start, where you use this iteration and sprints every 2 to 4 weeks. They have a meeting, so it's called a sprint meeting, a sprint review. But it's just a ceremony. It's a cargo cult, if you know what I mean. Right? You're just doing things for the sake of it, and they're just meeting every 2 weeks and think, hey, we're Agile, everything's sorted. No, it's not. Yes?
If you're a software a company, it's your service is to provide new software for other companies.
Yes.
How do you design your contracts?
Contract is another barrier to adoption of this, because I think, well, my personal opinion with contracts is that we tend to write contracts to defend ourselves in case things go wrong, right? It's not a very trusty philosophy. It's not collaborative at all. If you're late, you're going to pay that fine, and that kind of thing. And the contract, they tend to, again, it's output driven, because people will say, we want, what do we want for our money? So we're going to describe exactly what we're going to get. Where in fact, we shouldn't be describing the what, we should be describing the how. How are we going to get there? How are we going to work together to find out what the real value is and how we make that happen? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Are there any good templates around?
Templates?
Yeah.
Excuse me. So yes, some people have been thinking quite hard about Agile contracts, or contracts that are friendly with Agile. So people are thinking, for example, of having rolling contracts. So every sprint you deliver something, and then you get paid for that. But it only gets renewed if they accept it as there's good value, we carry on. So to me that makes a lot of sense, because you could really measure value, and when they say, well, we're not getting really any more value now, let's stop it, and it's fine. Let's not carry on. We're working, we're delivering more features but not getting any value out of it. There's no point in continuing. So that's quite an interesting model.
Can I react to this?
Yes.
In T-Mobile, as a big corporation, I saw that they many times contract they hire companies to fill the teams inside. They have people on site and they are letting them do what they want. And when they are happy with what they built already, they stop the project. So they don't pay in the way that they give you, we want this, but they hire the power to build it.
Yeah. Yes.
David, I see a fundamental problem with the Agile approach. And I think it's a common problem not only with Agile, but lean development and even prototyping. And the problem is this, I see that this is potentially a worm's eye view of what's needed in an organization. Mm-hmm. And the development team, being a collaboration of developers and users, could well see just the small picture and not the big picture of what's needed in the organization. And that problem or challenge becomes even more so as the organization increases. So you could easily get ad hoc development, which very often is the way that legacy systems have been developed. Mm-hmm. And you end up with horrendous problems at the end. There's no architecture, there's no sense of the big picture. So how do you address this with Agile?
What do you mean by, so I'm confused now when you said big picture in terms of quality or engineering practices.
Well, the big picture,
or the business big picture.
The business big picture, even, dare I say it, the big business picture within its environment. But perhaps that's going a bit too far, but at least avoiding a worm's eye view and a worm's eye development.
Well, it's true that Agile and its various techniques like Scrum and extreme programming and many variants, they came from developers. Right? And the critique is that it's by developers for developers. And I guess that's kind of what you're saying, if I understood right. But that's where bridging the gap with the business becomes really important. And that's what I was talking about, right? How do we make sure this is the right thing to build? Now, it doesn't mean we neglect building the thing right? We still have to have quality and good engineering practices. But that's not enough, is the point. Because you can build the thing right, but still not get the right thing. Does that make sense? So, in the traditional waterfall type plant, we make sure, and we're pretty good at it, right? Making sure we build the thing right. All these techniques of testing, unit testing, continuous integration, all these good things, they don't go away with Agile. In fact, they're probably even more important. but it's just not enough. Right? Declaring victory too soon, as I said.
I
Yes,
mean,
sorry.
you know, a big advantage of the traditional or the waterfall method is that you can front end it with that big picture view.
Yes.
And so essentially with Agile, you're omitting that.
Well, yes and no, in the sense that yes and no. So I think we have to admit the fundamental truth that we can't plan everything in advance, right? But it doesn't mean we have no plan. In fact, it's quite the opposite in our mind. You plan and you replan and you replan all the time as you discover things, as you reduce the risk and learn more about what it is you need to do. Right? So yes, there are some what we call cowboy agile, where people say, hey, no need for documentation, no need for meetings, no need for analysis, no need for architecture, design, nothing. Let's go. But that's just crazy. That's not how it should be, quite rightly. Yes.
Can I just ask about Fidelity?
Yes,
I
sure.
agree with everything you've been saying. I think it's a really good presentation and really good thinking in there. Where I got stuck in my mind was around Fidelity.
Right.
Because you showed the Mona Lisa picture. That was a good example of where you've got a sketch
Yeah.
and then you're getting towards a high definition picture.
That one.
And you made the point that if you change the sketch at the beginning, it's cheap because you haven't got much to change. Where I got to in my mind though was that if you're going to iterate this and change some functionality, then you're having to rebuild part of what you've built already.
Yes.
So therefore, you're then having to, by rebuilding something, you're adding more cost because you're
Yes.
taking away something
You are.
by
Yes.
replacing it. But I suppose you're
You
saying
are.
is the advantage that you're making sure it's about right before you go too far with it, and you're saying that's more valuable.
So yes, there is because you're redoing stuff,
Yeah.
there's obviously a cost to that. You're refactoring constantly. So there's a trade-off there, I guess, between between the refactoring that you do all the time. Is that cost higher than if we really think really hard at the beginning and got it right? Right. So you could be lucky when you get it right at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
You could be, but you could also not be. Right?
Yes.
That's the case.
So it's a risk reduction technique, really. So yes, it costs more, but you make sure you're going to get it right eventually. So it's, I guess, the difference between being efficient and being effective, right? On the bottom, when you're incrementing, you're very efficient because you're not redoing, right? You've worked it all out. But you might not be really effective because it might not be the right solution. On the other hand, it's the other way around. Okay. Yes.
The iterative thing, it's prototyping basically. So you are rapidly making prototypes. I always miss with this one thing. The normal approach has requirement gathering, so you know all the requirements and don't miss anything. But by prototyping, there is always possibility that you will skip some requirements because it never come up, and they can be quite important. So maybe you will throw away even pretty complex prototype.
Yeah, but that doesn't. What's the right word? If something comes up later, like a new requirement, or we discovered that, or the customer says actually we want to do this instead. Whatever the methodology, you're in trouble, right? And the point is, if that's going to come as a surprise, there is no way you were able to know that in advance. If by definition, if it's a late surprise, right? If it's someone that
but you can during the
depends what you mean,
requirement gathering, you can get lots of information. You speak with different stakeholders. You try to really gather all the info. But by prototyping, you skip these parts. I think that prototyping.
No, why did you skip it? Why did you skip it? I'm not sure why you would skip the analysis part. You have to think about what you're going to build, right, before you build it. So when you do the first drawing on the left, you've had some meetings, you have some discussions, and you say, well, we think we want something like that, and you go, okay, well, let's build it. The best way to test if your idea is a good idea is to build it, but you have to build it cheaply, so it takes little time to build, so it costs not much, and then you get that feedback. Was it the right thing to do? Did we want that hand up in near the face? Oh no, we didn't. Let's try to get it down. Oh, that's much better. And then we carry on.
When you focus on the big things first, I mean, this is the thing. And there's an awful. If you start with a lot of requirements, you end up with a load of low-level requirements, which one may or may not be important, and they may or may not be right,
Yes.
because they're based on somebody's perception of what the system will look like,
Yes.
which may not actually what it looks like when it's been built. So by focusing on the really key things, and then using that to shape the thing, you've actually got your scope, and you've got what you're trying to deliver. The area that you're prioritising is, if you like, the lower level requirements, basically.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And
they're the ones that, in many cases, you end up with a load of lower requirements, and that's typically what gets changed.
yes. I mean, in many ways, you have to build it to see it.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's because it depends what you're building as well. If it's really simple, if it's clear what we're building, there might no need for that, right? Because there's a cost to redoing and all these meetings, and there's a lot of communication in Agile. Since you don't work out all those specs to such a high level of details, you have to communicate a lot every day, all the time, right? So there's a high cost to this. So if it's clear cut what you need to build and it's simple, just by all means, just plan it and do it the old way. But if we're talking about complex R&D type work where you don't really know where we're going, people don't really know what they want. They know what they don't want, but they don't know what they want until they see it and go, oh, that's not really what I meant. Or I thought that's what I wanted, but it doesn't actually help me all that much. Let's rethink this. Does that make sense? I'm not sure. Given your
Yeah, absolutely.
yes.
Lowering the tone a bit, there are two major projects that we're all involved in at the moment, Brexit and locally HS2, where it seems in both cases we're doing the thing right, rather than doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And have you been selling your concepts?
Thank you. Well, it's true that since I got involved in that kind of work, I see it everywhere, not just software. It's true. Sorry, you.
How do you avoid scope creeps?
Sorry, second. Oh, scope
How do you
creep.
avoid?
So I think the best way to avoid scope creep is, if I find the slide, to me is this.
You've got a really demanding client that, like, they just kind of keep asking you questions because they are curious or whatever reason.
Yeah, and I think that's when they are focused on output, right? They want stuff, right? And there's a big problem if so when you prioritize your backlog, right, you're going to have maybe some must-have, some nice-to-have, and then let's say some maybe if we have time, we do this. Right? So priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. But must, should, could is also how people frame this. And we have the must item, the should items, and the could items. You have a problem though if your list of must items is as big as the budget, because there's no flexibility here, and that's a problem. And they'll try to get more because they want more for their money. But again, they are thinking in terms of output. So that's where the consultancy aspect of this comes into play. So when I was talking about building a value-driven relationship, that's where the work goes, and it's really hard to do. It's really hard to do, to try to say, look, what do you really need? Not what you want, what do you need? What would actually change your business, and just focus on that. And by doing this kind of mapping, where we just have ideas, right? Because requirements are never really that required. We always descope at the last minute, just to be on time. So if you descope a requirement, it wasn't really required, was it? So personally, I have an issue with the word requirement for that reason. To me, they are ideas. Right? There's many ways to solve a problem. So let's do it and test it. Let's be scientific about it. Right? So yeah, avoiding scope creep is a good way this way, because you have defined your goal, right? Your goal, what impact you want to make, etc. You've thought about a bunch of ideas and just try them. Try the one that you think is most likely. So the idea there, you do as little as possible to achieve that goal, not as much as possible. Does that make sense? Yeah. There's very different ways of thinking about it.
Thanks for the presentation. I find it really useful. So my company's going agile at the moment. I find it really easy and to see the benefits of going agile. I'm a business analyst, so getting users not to put must-have against every requirement is like the biggest issue that we have, but to say we're going to build something first really makes people think, so it's really useful that way. I can see how it's going to be easy to build. What about off-the-shelf packages? How is it applied?
Good question. I'm not. So in what context? I mean, if off-the-shelf product, you just buy it and use it, right?
So our company, we don't build. We get in third parties to we buy in the software when we configure, or we buy in the software.
Yeah.
But we're still going agile. So to me, I'm not sure if we're just incrementally going to be bringing in the software. I can't see how you iterate around something that you're buying in.
If you're not building something, then I'm not quite sure how this applies.
So perhaps we're pretending like
if it's an ERP type package, then there's tons of configuration.
So
you can configure it iteratively still. So it depends on what sort of package it is and how much configurability there is built into it.
But is that not still an incremental build though? Because you're just saying, well, I'm going to do that bit, then I'm going to do that bit, then I'm going to do that bit. So I'm still going to do it once. I'm not actually going to. I'm not going to iterate. So I'm just kind of applying what what you're saying to.
No, that's right. I mean,
agile.
Lots of companies do what you're saying. They have the client and the service company providing the agile developers and so on to work together. It's just they've agreed a 6-month contract of 6 people on site or whatever, and you get what they've built at the end of it.
But incrementing is not bad per se. Right? It just means you know more or less in advance what it is you're going to do. If the parts you're doing are well established, and especially if it's a configuration thing, then it's typically well oiled, I guess, as a building machine. It's fairly different from a situation where you're building something custom and something new, and the customers sort of think they know what they want, but probably not.
Do you think that there is some limiting size benefits of Agile? Because I understand that Agile is good for small and medium projects, but I believe that there is a size where it's...
There is so people talk about scaling Agile, which is an issue, because historically it comes from little teams, right? The product owner, as it's called in Scrum, actually owns the product. It's a small business, startup like situation. Or XP again, small teams, maybe 10 people, big maximum. And people are thinking, how do we scale this? Right? And it's a big issue. But there are frameworks that people have developed. There's something called SAFe, so scaled Agile framework, where they try to go in sort of a hybrid, between a little bit more planning. They talk about like a release train. So you have to get on board the train. Once you build your features, you sort of put it on the train and it gets released all together. And if you have an integration team, that kind of thing. But it is difficult. It's not really designed for big, large-scale projects. Now, there are a lot of statistics that shows that big projects just fail. You know, they are just doomed to fail most of the time. So, you know, let's divide it into small chunks. Right? It's easy to say, right, and how to do, of course. But big projects have, by this, you know, almost by nature, really, really risky things to do. So whatever methodology you're going to use, it's difficult. But that's something that's brand new, and people are talking about it. But it's not a solved problem.
But you can use a lot of agile sort of thinking.
Yes,
when
absolutely.
you approach big programs.
Absolutely.
You know, if you think about the prioritisation and you think about not wasting a lot of time up front
Yes.
on things that don't matter and focus on the big things, then you can actually still use that sort of approach. And
Absolutely.
You come down, and then there are certain areas within those projects and programs that, yes, you can apply pure agile to those.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's the way it's a mindset.
It's a mindset, absolutely. So you have, like I mentioned earlier, you have several variants like Scrum. There's Kanban. There's Crystal. There's many ways of doing it. But Agile in itself is just a manifesto with a couple of. It's one page. It's a few principles, and that's it. So I didn't have time to show all of that, but it's really just a mindset. Something like we prioritize this over that. So having a working product is more important than having documentation, for example. That kind of philosophy doesn't say that documentation is not important. Of course not. But having, if you were to choose which one you want, you want the working product. So that kind of mindset. So yes, absolutely, the mindset of testing. You have an hypothesis. We have a problem. The hypothesis is we're going to solve it with that. Let's build it as cheap as possible, as fast as possible, and test that. So we make sure this is the right thing to build, and let's use good engineering practices to have good quality built in, which is what you get with that feedback loop. Absolutely. All right.
If there's no more questions, I'd just like to thank David for giving us a very interesting talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If anyone's collecting CPD certificates and the like, there are some here at the front if you want to collect them on the way out.
David, could you
Yes.
put that Peter Drucker